Welcome back. You're watching Eye on India. We're in conversation with Mark Weinberger, the global chairman of EY, as he gets ready to demit office. What do you see as the big challenges as far as the audit business is concerned, Mark? And I'll ask you specifically in the context of what we're seeing here in India. There have been changes, regulatory changes that have been announced in order to improve and enhance audit quality. But yet we have seen several accidents. In fact, just in the last 12 to 24 months, several new accidents on that front. And the concern is that auditors sometimes wash their hands off the issues, don't raise the red flags when it ought to be appropriate for them to do so. What are you seeing, not just in India, but globally, when it comes to the issues involving the audit profession and where it's headed?
Yeah, so the audit profession has an incredibly important role in global capital markets, of course. I mean, we need to look at and assure the financial statements of publicly traded businesses and businesses that have debt and other issuance in the public markets. And so, as you would expect, we're at the epicenter of almost every major issue that comes up. I will tell you, the business has gotten incredibly complex when you look at the complexities in the global economy. Massive shifts in currency valuations, shifts in energy prices, business models transforming, externalities coming up from the geopolitical changes in various markets and what that means. And so the business of auditing itself has gotten very complex, and with increased globalization. So we have to step up and own that responsibility. There's no doubt about it. And some of the things that you're seeing, I think, around the world is as these business model changes happen, and as governance changes in various different geographies, the audit profession has to morph along with it. We have very specific regulatory responsibilities in each country, which don't always align globally, of course. There's different regulators and different rules in various countries, and we have to make sure when we work with global companies around the world, we are, through technology, through communication, have one standard quality processes and methodology that we apply around the world. And that's incredibly important. And it's also very important that we use, when we look at acquiring new clients, that we make sure we fully understand the business and the clients, who they are and what they're doing, and ask ourselves, not only could we take on these clients, but should we? Because we've seen some things, as you suggest, around the world, where in retrospect, maybe firms have taken on clients that were too risky, and we've got to make sure that we don't do that.
One is the issue that you talked about, the complexity of the regulatory architecture, the fact that we don't have harmonization or standardization as far as rules and regulations are concerned. Then you've got the whole sort of disruption on account of technology, but technology also being used as a tool to enhance audit quality. But Mark, in your experience now, having sort of been in this business for so many years and heading EY for the last 6 years, what would you say are the key challenges that this business faces, and how do you see those being addressed as we move forward?
So technology has actually helped us quite a bit, Shereen, in quality. I mean, we now, for our audits example, where we have our audits, we spent over $500 million in new technology, where now we can have our lead audit partners see everything that's going on in an account anywhere in the world through a technology system, even on a mobile platform, and the client has insights to that too. Importantly, what that does is gives us more real-time information. It gives us the ability to make sure that we're focusing and making sure we're working with the clients and meeting deadlines, and being able to see where we may be falling behind. Technology is absolutely reforming the audits. We now have drones that do inventory in many places around the world. I think you're going to continue to see that. And as we get more and more real-time data through our technology, we're going to have more real-time audits. It won't be as looking at historical information. We'll be able to see more real-time what's going on. And with predictive analytics, hopefully even anticipate where problems might occur for our clients more quickly. One of the biggest issues in audit right now is what we call the expectation gap, where investors expect us to obviously know and find everything that's going on within a client, including whether or not a fraud could occur, and our ability in various jurisdictions and responsibility to get in and do those things. And so we're really working with regulators around the world to close this expectation gap and make sure that we are doing what we can to get the right information and be able to identify and make sure the material the statements on the financials are correct. At the same time, meeting and operating within ecosystems that are unique in different parts of the world.
But, you know, that's an interesting point that you make on the expectation gap, Mark, and I just want to spend a little bit more time talking to you about that. What is going to be key to be able to bridge this expectation gap? You said you're talking to regulators, but what about clients? You know, you will need all stakeholders to be involved actively in order for you to be able to bridge this expectation gap. What's the way forward? What's going to be key here?
Well, it's a really good question, Shereen. And so when you look at what we say is the expectation gap, it's really investors wanting to make sure that the information that management's giving them and that we're signing off on is correct so they can make good investment decisions. That requires, first of all, a regulator who has the authority to go in and make sure that the companies themselves are providing the right information. And we've seen changes in the United States with Sarbanes-Oxley a period back where management has an increased responsibility to give the auditor certain information and sign off on it. Increased penalties and authorities overseeing the audit profession is also incredibly important. And then the development of independent audit committees, which has been very important around the world, which has the responsibility to hold the auditors accountable to the company and also oversee management's responsibility in the audit. Where we've seen the entire three elements of that, strong management with a commitment to the financials, independent audit profession that's appropriately regulated, and the independent audit committees that are doing their role as well, we have a much greater chance of meeting that expectation gap where investors are concerned. But you know, it's very different around the world. We're seeing this debate play out certainly in the UK right now, for example, where they're looking to give more authority to the regulators and make some changes within the audit profession to do some of the things that in other parts of the world are being done.
You know, in the Indian context, you just talked about the changes that the UK is trying to make. But in the Indian context, in your experience, on the back of what your team tells you, what do you believe is the need of the hour? Because there are concerns on the veracity of what's being put out as far as balance sheets are concerned, and that would be a cause for worry even for the audit business in India. So, you know, what do you believe is the way forward when it comes to the expectation gap, specifically in the Indian context, on the back of your experience here?
Well, I think that, you know, the good news is that we are actively talking to regulators here in India, and there has been a number of changes, obviously, in the audit profession in India to try and deal with either the appearance of any kind of problems within the profession or in the audit area, as well as any actual problems. You know, I would say I think that management's focus has been good, and the businesses need to continue to put the right resources into providing information, financial information to investors through the audit. And the regulator has really, I think, been actively involved and stepped up. So, you know, I think that, you know, in India, they've moved to some sort of rotation in different places as well. We've just been through that. That's always a difficult period because when you have rotation, you have new auditors coming in, others leaving, balls can get dropped. So there's been a lot of focus to make sure that we're not going to let that happen as we hand off the ball from one to the other. And hopefully now we're through that for a while, and we can continue to focus on the actual audit statements. The last area, Shereen, really important is actually the audit standards themselves. And the audit standards are constantly updated to make sure that they represent technology changes and changes that's going on in the world. So we have to make sure we're working with regulators because, you know, we're only as good as the standards are because that's what we have to apply to make our decisions as auditors. So we're continually working with them as well here in India and around the world to update those standards to what's going on in the real world.
You know, let me move away from audit and how you see the business evolving. And Mark, let me ask you about what you see as far as the next few years when it comes to consolidation, when it comes to M&A, private equity. The action and the momentum has been very strong, especially in 2018. We've got a lot of blockbuster IPOs lined up in the US, Uber, Lyft, and many more, Airbnb, and as I said, many more. What's the outlook on the IPO pipeline, on the M&A pipeline, as well as the kind of big-ticket private equity exits that we've seen?
Yeah, so really important questions because obviously capital transactions drive a lot of the growth in the economy. We continue to see a very strong interest in capital transactions, and whether they be, as you suggest, IPOs where companies become public, the big unicorns, or divestitures when companies split up. We're seeing more and more of that across the United States and across the world as well. And I think you're going to continue to see those. Whether we're seeing growth in the global economy or whether we're seeing contraction, the reasons that companies do transactions like this, which is to align and update their business models, to whether it's for synergies to get more efficient, or whether it's to grow in a market where there's not as much growth and they have inorganic growth in order to grow their business. These issues are all out there, and I think we're going to continue to see those. As you mentioned, last year was a banner year for M&A transactions. It slowed in the fourth quarter because of all the uncertainty in the financial markets. But we're seeing great appetite this year again for looking at everything from acquisitions to divestitures to, as you specifically said and are correct, IPOs, certainly specifically in the United States market. We have 5 or 6 of them that could be blockbusters out on the West Coast in the technology space.
You talked about divestitures. Let me ask you, Mark, about what we're seeing. Some policymakers now address the issue on whether, companies are too big for good. This could be led by antitrust movements, which we've seen play out across Europe, in the US now, ahead of the presidential elections. I don't know whether this is going to pick up momentum, but it certainly is something that's being spoken about. What's your own take on this as we move forward in the context of large tech companies? Do you believe that we are going to see a much stronger call now to evaluate whether companies are too big for good?
Well, when you talk about the tech companies, I think one of the issues has been really, for the longest time, it's been how do we get more and better technology? The consumers are demanding it, certainly, and companies are coming up with incredible models that are growing at huge speed and attracting a lot of capital. More and more, even this year in Davos when we were there, the discussion has been not just around how does technology transform business models and how is it transforming the workforce, but what are the privacy and national security concerns around the use of this technology from different types of companies, whether it be data companies or platform companies or technology companies more broadly. And I think that question is going to be asked more and more. We saw some regulation, of course, across Europe with on the privacy issue with the GDPR. And I think now we're looking in the United States, and I believe we will see continued focus by policymakers on regulation of technology. But when you come in to start breaking up companies and or undoing mergers and things like that, it's very dangerous for, I think, governments to come in and start to draw the lines thinking about where and how companies can best operate and become efficient. I do think antitrust is important and everything should be looked at, and it is, and several deals have been slowed down or stopped. But as far as just coming in and breaking up companies, I don't know if that'll be the focus, honestly, as much as I think regulation, privacy, national security issues for customers and employees will be more front and center.
So, Mark, let me end then by asking you, as you step down on the 1st of July later this year to start a new innings for yourself, the state of the world, you talked about the rise of nationalism and what that's meant as far as the electoral process is concerned, what that's meant for free trade, reciprocity, which has been the big ask of someone like President Trump, what this means in terms of redrawing the boundaries and the responsibilities of capitalism. What would you be most optimistic about, and what would you be most concerned about as you leave office?
Well, I'm optimistic, Shereen, because I get to see, we hire 65,000 people every day. We have 2 million applicants. I give commencement addresses, and I see young people around the world, and I really honestly believe our next generation is more technologically savvy, more global-minded, more inclusive than ever, and I think they're going to bring a lot of great thought to the debate as they move through the system. So I'm very optimistic about our future there. I do think we really need to remember that after World War II, when we put together the global infrastructure on trade, when we put NATO together, when we had the EU come together, this was all to make us globally interdependent, economically working together to create and make sure we have peace. I think those infrastructure needs to be revisited. I think we do have to update a lot of this infrastructure, both regionally and globally. We can't ignore it. But if we lose confidence in it, we will have no great arbiter for our disputes. We'll have no high standards that we're going to have to live by. And that's when you get into potential issues. So I think globally we're going to need to find a way to come together and work across border. The biggest problems we face in the world are ones that you can't handle alone, whether it be climate change, whether it be fresh, clean water, whatever. You go down a whole list of things, nuclear arms. We all have to work together on that. The good news is, despite all our problems, Shereen, my optimism comes, if you look over the last 30 years, it's the best time ever to be alive on Earth. We have more people who've moved out of poverty in the last 30 years than in all of our history. We have more people now in the middle class than we ever did before. And you're seeing, with technology, I think, the opportunity created around the world for a great future. We just need to work together and make sure that we see that come to fruition.
Well, Mark, we wish you the very best of luck. Thanks for your time today and, of course, over the years for joining us on CNBC TV 18. We wish you all the very best as you move forward.
Well, thank you. I hope I'll still see you around the world during my travels, and appreciate everything you do to bring great news to all the people. It's always great to talk to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. From all of us here for now on India, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week. Till then, goodbye.